Some of the kindest, most caring, and definitely informative, well-read individuals that I've ever met are journalists. They're hardworking, they're round the clock. When I studied journalism, we would go out through the middle of the night, early in the morning. We would talk to people who often weren't spoken to. It was really a fascinating pathway and a way to learn about other people. But are you being lied to? Are those trustworthy faces actually sociopaths? A lot's come out this year, and I think it might be true. I don't know. Did you have a grandmother that ever told you to believe none of what you saw and half of what you heard, or vice versa? I can't remember the saying, but it really warned you that even if you saw something, don't believe what you actually saw. Now, this really hit hard when I lived in Argentina. I saw a very large gathering of individuals around the Pink House, which is their form of a White House in Buenos Aires. And they had signs and they were gathering, they were talking. Apparently on that day every year they gathered. Yet as I went back to the home I was staying in, I turned on the TV and the news was showing something very different. Wild attacks, something like we saw during the peaceful protests, but I had just been there. That's not at all what was happening, and that wasn't the crowd that had gathered. Yet they were lying via CNN to the world. Why was CNN World News doing this? In fact, my parents called from the United States to find out if I was safe and okay. Absolutely, I'd met a very nice group of friends. So why are we constantly having what we see and what we hear manipulated? Who is pulling the strings? And I ask, as the lead to this video, are you working for a sociopath? So this came up today specifically because I'm looking behind the scenes. As you're getting ready in 2026 to build a solid foundation, you have to understand where your money has come and there's strings attached. Now, one of the easiest pathways for you is using AI for a solopreneur career. But what we've seen is who is programming the programmers. Let me pull this up real fast and share the screen so we can, now that I've gotten a clue on how this works. Benz, he does quite a bit of investigative journalism, and it's very interesting what he's uncovered. Now, this particular YouTube was back from January, I believe. Let me see if it'll post here. Maybe you're seeing the date. I saw it before. I believe it was in January 2025. But what he does is he looks through USAID and finds out where's the money going and how's it being used. And this particular program, I'm just going to, I don't know if you can hear it or not, but you can see the screen definitely.
We uncovered this in the stream about a month ago after news came out scandalizing this, the largest group of investigative journalists in the world. Another outlet giving credible investigative journalism showing that they actually received half of their funding from the State Department and USAID, and that the State Department actually had control over hiring and firing decisions.
So what's interesting is he's saying that the money is going from USAID, which is supposedly taxpayer dollars, and in exchange for hiring and programming decisions. So if you watch the whole video, which I definitely recommend you take the time to do, you see that there's a difference between, all of a sudden something's clicking in here, sorry. There's a difference between a grant and a contract. Typically, we believe that grants are free money from the government. You can go do what you want as long as it's under the scope of the way that the money is being passed out. So for instance, if you receive money to give food to children, then you need to give food to children. But the way that you deliver that under a grant is usually up to you, where a contract would be controlling how you do it, who you do it, the whole process, who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so what we're looking at here is USAID is identifying foreign journalists and we know, on our soil too, that will get a grant, and these grants have now been shown to total over $20 million. They will get a grant and sit down with the CIA, with USAID, with the US State Department. There's a number of players involved. And they will lay out their plan for the year. They will be approved. They can talk about what messaging they need to get out. They will also be allowed to hire specific individuals and not hire individuals. And this is why I asked, do you work for a sociopath? Government funding does not come without strings. And if you're receiving money from the government, or your company is receiving money from the government, there's a reason why. Now, I didn't pull up a link here, but you may have noticed that as of December, I believe it was 22nd, DJI can no longer bring drones into the United States. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole, essentially, it's telling the most profitable and strongest drone maker that they can no longer do business because other people have lobbied so that they can have that spot. Now, based on the research I saw, DJI has about 95% of the drone sales in the United States because they offer a superior product at a reasonable price. They also offer a wide spectrum of products. So people who are drone entrepreneurs are really able to count on this company, not only for the upfront product, but what happens if it breaks or it needs repairs. According to the sites I've looked at, they've done a phenomenal job of having manufacturer repair shops. And if they can't repair it, they give you a new one. It's phenomenal. But the problem is, moving forward, if yours breaks, sure, they still have their manufacturers here or their repair shops here. However, they can't send you a new one. The government has said no. Even though they never accepted any government contracts, they only sell to private citizens and businesses. And in fact, the software within those, from what I understand, can be swapped out for US software only. So why has that company been run out of town? Well, if we see a project like Mike Benz looking in and seeing that somebody's pulling the strings of who can play the game and step forward and who doesn't. So what game was DJI asked to play? And they didn't step up to the plate. Perhaps there should be more respect there than what we actually have. But this program that he talks about goes around the world and finds key journalists. In one case that he mentioned, there's 5 from Romania and then other countries as well on this team. And they're allowed to hire only who the US government allows them to hire. And through the year, they present what pieces they're going to write. But it isn't about flowers or museums or general government truth. It's about manipulating a market, propaganda tied to Mockingbird media, so that they're putting out lies and dirt about individuals. They're telling that crimes have been committed, when in fact, they're the ones making it up. Now, why is this important? Because in order to have any kind of justice or in order to move forward, governments and investigators and policing agencies look towards the media for validation. They're independent. They're on their own. They came up with this on their own. So it must be true. We'll rely on their reporting. And from there, we can move forward with our prosecutions. Now, where did we see this most recently on a very high level in the United States? All the attacks against Trump. Not to say that well, we won't go there right now, but the Russia collusion. They used independent media resources to help dig up this data and then reference that as a reason why they needed to move forward, when in fact, we've already proven that they've paid for that data. In fact, Clinton got directly tied to paying for that data, allegedly. So as Mike continues, let me have this moving here a little bit. I'm looking for him to scroll his screen. Let's see if it'll show. Here we go. That's the screen I wanted right there. So what he's saying is some of the achievements of this group that's called OCCRP, because of their lies and deceit, being paid by the U.S. government contracts and contracts under the form of a grant. Now, this is important because if they were paid contracts, then they would be an arm of the U.S. government. But when it's just a USAID grant, well, then they're free. They can research it the way they want, is the perception that we're being told. So they have gotten at least $4.5 billion in fines. However, as he uncovers and goes forward in his journalism here in the YouTube video, you see that jumped to over 10 billion. So what they're doing is setting up lies against people and then seizing their assets. Have we not seen this with Russia? Have we not seen it with, what are the two guys that live in Romania called? I'm blanking on them right now. The Tate brothers. I don't know what all they've been involved in, but it sure is interesting that they got the same hit piece that the gentleman from WikiLeaks got. They always come in with some kind of a honeypot. True or not, they'll go down that route. 548 policy changes. They blackmailed individuals in order to change policies, and these are overseas. 21 resignations, and they call sackings here, which I find is an odd word to choose for a government report. 21 people have been forced to resign because they wouldn't play ball. And so journalists dug up dirt or created dirt, manufactured dirt to have them remove and destroy their lives. 456 people falsely arrested and indicted and sentenced and jailed. This is because of your tax dollar at work, supposedly finding that kind, generous individual. Let me show the screen here so you can see. This is what I was reading right here on the screen. 4.5 billion, 548 policy changes, 21 resignations, and 456 arrests by independent journalists, those who are meant to really help you understand the truth. So let's go back a little bit. USAID in February said that they were in crisis and in regards to funding the future of independent media. It was our job somehow to give money around the planet to help independent media, to help them survive, to help them get the truth. They were no more than an extension of the CIA. This was February. It happened that fast. If anybody says this administration isn't happening quickly, this is a reminder. This was less than 30 days in. The Independent Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, that's more true than what we would believe, was forced to lose the services of 43 valued reporters and staff because of the lack of funding. Somebody woke up and pulled the plug. Now, what does this mean? Global Investigative Journalism Network. USAID has tied together an investigative network of journalists who are independent. They're just paid grants to do their work. USAID Crisis and Funding the Future of Independent Media. This was by Rowan Phillip, February 17th, 2025. Independent nonprofit media around the globe suddenly find themselves at the center of a perfect storm of at least 4 new existential threats. The sudden holding of USAID foreign assistance funding by the U.S. Trump administration froze $268 million in agreed grants for independent media and the free flow of information in more than 30 countries. 30 countries were receiving these funds. They were being manipulated. Now, if you don't remember, under the Obama administration, they changed the rules locally. So now propaganda to the United States citizens. Not to say that this is new and they're going to start there, but they put it on the books. Isn't that odd? Why can't the truth be told? Well, remember, as we went through the last 5 years, did anybody put a foreign chemical substance into their body out of fear? Did anybody stay in their home out of fear? Did anybody voluntarily not to go to work, and maybe they were a teacher, and let those children to survive by themselves while they sat in their home and collected a paycheck? The manipulation is broad and deep. And so I ask again, do you work for a sociopath? The next item I wanted to look at here journalism on sale, how USAID doled out millions to buy journalists, media groups. This was the 15th of February. Earlier this month, in a stunning disclosure, WikiLeaks revealed that the United States Agency for International Development, remember, it's not USAID, it's USAID. It's a manipulated arm of the undercover agencies of the United States, and they bankrolled hundreds of media organizations worldwide over the years, decades and decades, sparking concerns about free and independent media. If you want to read that article, it's there for you. Well, this comes up now because there's something really bizarre going on here with this. Absolutely odd, don't you think? She's definitely an actress. Nothing adds up. The federal government is lying to us about what is happening. We don't know how much is being lied to us, but we certainly not being given the truth. It's very clear that that's the case. And in fact, somehow we slip. Now, wasn't it odd for anybody who followed Charlie Kirk and listened to him and studied his debates? You would understand there were some individuals that he did enjoy working with and listening to. There were some individuals that he was very honest that they were not the solution. They should not be role models. And yet his wife, widow, pulled two of those individuals right on the stage. Did you know there's allegations that Ben Shapiro paid Turning Point around $1 million to be on that stage, and then turned around and slaughtered them all? There's also allegations. Well, why was Nicki Minaj there? And she's also an actress. Why was the mockery there? And have you ever been in an uncomfortable situation where somebody said something or blurted something out with their big mouth and then nobody knew what to say? Well, you know, it's interesting. Just like the Barry Weiss conversation, that whole show, Erica Kirk did blink. When Nicki Minaj blurted out what she did, it was no more than a placeholder, because Erica, that conversation, already ready to be poised and responsive. It was instant. She knew that comment was coming. Why are we being played? But what's really interesting is this whole spark didn't bring the conservative movement together. In fact, it's putting a further rift in it as we question, where are the sociopaths? Who is accepting money and why? You know, there's a lot of fingers that have always been pointed at Jones and also Carlson. And anytime anybody steps off the normal narrative, all of a sudden they're getting paid for. Well, are they actually getting paid for it? It could be. Remember the whole Qatar conversation with Carlson? Well, was that just dug up by what was that, OCCP, USAID funding? Or is there really something there? The truth is, you and I will never know. Everything is so manipulative and played that even the Candace Owens, Mitch Snow, once it's out there, you don't know when something was manufactured and when it wasn't. You know, one of the disagreements they have right now, and I meant to pull this up, but you've seen the write-up from the police officer of the event, the incident report. Well, quite honestly, I look at that with all the mistakes and spelling errors, and I think they must have been educated in California. There's no attention to detail. Numbers don't matter. It's written in haste. The errors in that give me no indication whatsoever that anything there is false, other than they've received a California education. So even evidence that we would have looked 2 years ago, where you, before you file an incident report, you're going to make sure that it's on point. This was probably just some entry military person, and I don't know anything about the military, but somebody that's a newbie that was told, hey, type this up, because nobody likes to do reports. And this individual thought that nobody would ever look at this or see this. This was just something standard that you have to file. Quickly typed it up and moved on. Never thought that it would be all over the internet. And yet, meanwhile, when we look back at what is really going on here, we start to question who's on what side, who's being paid, and why. Have you ever wondered why top journalists at CNN or MSNBC or Fox or any of those, you can name all of them on either side of the spectrum, why are they getting $20 million a year or whatever that salary is? Doesn't that seem odd to you? Because they're paid to lie. They're paid to sit there and be an actor. And this is where we supposedly get our news. We can't be naive anymore. You've got to be aware of what's happening. So I want to look at, I've thrown around a few keywords here, and I want to look at what is a sociopath. This is Smart Money Bible. I have not used them before. I just did a quick search, but it was an interesting flow. It asks, are these hidden signs of a sociopath in your life? So let me bring this back here as I continue. Sociopath, often associated with antisocial personal disorder. It's kind of similar to what I believe the gentleman in yesterday's video meant. I think he said disassociative. Here we're talking about antisocial. This lines up a little bit more. Can be, I still can't figure out, and I hope you're not hearing the sound here, but so are these hidden signs? Sociopathy. I can't even pronounce that right now. Often associated with antisocial personality disorder, can be perplexing and alarming to recognize in someone close to you. You know, I worked for a company in Orange County one time, and I've talked about this over the years, but it was a rough time in my life. I had an illness. I had to get a job. I drove everywhere with resumes and trying to find a place. I finally found a place that was hiring, and that should be the first clue. So I was hired. I was put on the floor as a mortgage company, and we were doing pretty much the ninja loans. I didn't. I had to require jobs, and it was quite significant, the level of investigation I did before giving out the money. But essentially, this was a huge warehouse of anybody who would even make up a job, a W-2, put it in the file. If they were willing to lie about it, they could get $5,000 to $10,000 in a payout. It was massive, the scam. In fact, when I would drive home at night and I would see everybody leaving the office, and at night, I mean, we worked very long hours, I would notice that the executives of the company all had brand new cars, but the cars themselves were older. It didn't make sense to me why they had the license plate not, there was no license plate, and there was just a sticker in the window of the car. Now you have to have that paper thing that goes over, but now you just put a little thing in the corner of the passenger side of the windshield, and that shows them that it's a new car. So unless you get pulled over and somebody checks it, a quick look is, oh, you just bought that car. And yet all the executives had that. They weren't paying DMV fees, which is a clue on the level of integrity. Well, one day we were there and it was about mid-morning and the fire alarm went off. I didn't smell anything. I didn't have any indication that, other than probably an electrical shortage. But all of a sudden, the executives came running out, huffing and puffing, and saying that it's on fire. You've got to get out. The fire alarm, got to get out. These people never wanted us to stop working. It was as close to a sweatshop as I've ever worked in. And I knew that there were a lot of pushback to the quality of work that I did because it took me a little longer to get the facts and the real documents. But somehow they allowed me to play ball. And I learned after the fact that they needed a certain percentage of their mortgages checked and validated. And so they would go to my files because they knew that everything in there had valid, it was valid information. It wasn't manufactured. So we all went outside and then we were forced to line up to get back in. We were all fired. We had to line up if we weren't smart enough to get our keys. So I'd grab my keys and my purse and everything. So people had to line up and make an appointment to get back in. And I went up to make an appointment because, maybe there's some knickknacks or something in my desk I needed. And they tell me, oh, no, not you. You're not fired. You're part of the top 5%. You get to stay. And I remember this was the very first time I'd ever sworn to an employee. I used language that was completely inappropriate because I found this tactic of right-sizing a company to be absolutely disgusting. No, I did not return to that company. Had my keys in my pocket. I drove on home and had to look for another sociopath to work for. Because somehow, who rises to power and who's able to keep those businesses? Those that are willing to play ball. So as I read this here, are these signs of a sociopath? What is sociopathy? Sociopathy is a personality disorder characterized by persistent antisocial behavior, impaired empathy. They can't feel for others. And bold, disinhibited, and egotistical traits. They're above the law. Remember the saying, nobody's above the law? Look at the individuals who've been saying that. Individuals with sociopathic tendencies often struggle to conform to social norms and may engage in deceitful or manipulative behaviors without remorse. Oh, we've had several speakers of the House along that line recently. Although sociopaths can appear charming on the surface, their lack of genuine emotional connection poses challenges in forming meaningful relationships. They're not going to be your friend, but they'll do everything to make sure that you feel warm and fuzzy around them. Key symptoms to watch for. Recognizing the symptoms of a sociopath involves observing patterns of behavior over time. Common indicators include a blatant disregard for laws and social rules, frequent lying or deceitfulness aimed at personal gain or pleasure, impulsivity leading to reckless decisions, irritability or aggression, manifesting or as physical fights and assaults, or consistent irresponsibility, especially regarding financial obligations for work commitments, an absence of remorse of harming others. There's emotional manipulation and lack of empathy, impact on relationships, seeking help and protecting yourself often doesn't help you. So I wanted to take back as well my time at Intuit. Do you remember there was a period of time right around 2018, 2019, where over 6,000 CEOs and executives of companies suddenly stepped down? It was massive. And we kept wondering, what is the wave that's coming that they know about? Well, then all of a sudden, an immense amount of foreign-born CEOs were placed in CEO positions, board of directors, executive roles. They were brought in, and they may have been here for 20 years. But somehow they were now getting paid millions to billions of dollars in order to lead these companies into the ground. They ended up taking on private equity money. A lot of the companies have completely imploded. They ended up shifting their hiring practices to H-1B visa holders rather than locals. They would hire people overseas who had specialized talent, quote unquote, and then train them in-house because they really didn't have the skill set. Well, companies like Intuit focus on taxes, small business accounts, payroll. That means that that company has everything about you. Maybe you never agreed to use Intuit's products, but let's say your employer did. Then through your employer, they know everything about you, any bank account that you've ever given your employer. If you've done taxes through them, then they have your independence information, social security number, bank accounts, ages, location, what they do. They've got all of that. Plus they track you. I'll let you know as well that I never applied to work for Intuit. I'd previously worked for H&R Block. And during COVID, I wanted an opportunity to work from home and an opportunity to work in a seasonal, so I could do this one season, go ahead and get back into the tech industries once everything opened up, and continue to do this seasonally. It sounded like a great plan. So I applied to H&R Block, knowing I'd worked there before. It was simply a matter of submitting an application online and then going down to an office and say, I already submitted it. When do I start? Seasonally, they'll hire pretty much anybody off the street. Except instantly, after I submitted that interest form to H&R, I got an email from a recruiter at Intuit. I knew that there had been a cross switch of the data. I went down to H&R Block the next day and no, they didn't have my application. Yet in my mind, Intuit would have been a better organization to work for. And I don't know if this will come on the screen or not. I can't see the screen right now. So I took that role, and wow, did I go down a rabbit hole. The CEO was foreign born. The level of manipulation was something I'd never seen before. Now, I was extremely blessed. I was placed on a team with an attorney from southern states of the United States. And then from there, I was promoted to an individual who, again, phenomenal woman from Southern California. And I thought, you know what? This is really amazing. I found a perfect life balance with individuals that are mentors and encouraging. I learned a lot, an absolute amount. However, the woman from Southern California, after less than a week, we had a team of about 30 peers, and then her came on and told us that she could not work on that team. It didn't align with her integrity. She wanted to go back to the other side of the company. So many of us picked up immediately and wanted to follow. We were not allowed. We were told that if we wanted to, we'd have to quit during COVID and then reapply on the other side that we had just come from. And we knew that if we quit, we weren't getting back in the door. But we didn't really know the depth of it. So we were introduced to our new supervisor. Our new supervisor happened to be an individual from a foreign country. And as I saw later via H-1B files, and I don't think she had an H-1B. I think she was here under a different format and had been here a long time. But from that company during lockdowns, when we were not on campus, around 1,800 individuals had been brought into this country under the perception of being experts that they were not. So this individual came on, and with the first introduction of our new manager, I DM'd my coworkers and said she's a pathological liar. There was no question whatsoever. And as I found out, which we all know, all emails and direct messages are seen by the employer. And I hoped that if somebody saw that at least we would have a chance to move on and get our old manager back or go another direction. Well, my manager saw it. And that's when the lies really began and the attacks towards me. She openly stated she wasn't going to work anybody with darker skin, and then she wasn't going to work with anybody with lighter skin. And she used different terms for that. I call it racism. She's a guest in our country and was telling people here that she was not going to work with them. She made life hell for everybody because she lied to us and then isolated us, locked us out of meetings, and then lied to her supervisors about us. Her playbook was the same with each one of us as we just came together and jotted down what the pathway was and what she would do next. We knew a step ahead. And as many of us reached out to HR saying, look, we don't want to file a complaint. We just want to make a lateral move. Any other manager, any other department, just lateral. Because we knew that there was something going on with the company. The one, they were tolerating this and they were encouraging it because they were very aware what was going on. And yet they didn't remove her. Now, if we fast forward, 4 years now, she's still there. Meanwhile, all the other managers that we'd worked with in and out or covered during vacation, they were tapped on the shoulder one day and very oddly removed. Yet she's still there. And the makeup of her team, from what I've heard, is over 90% from her own country. There was a level of sociopath there. And yet, for some reason, the company encouraged it. So as I saw the video this morning about Mike Benz, I mean, not about Mike Benz, but Mike Benz's presentation, it really struck me as to which companies are accepting money from the US government and or foreign governments for vice versa. You know, a number of individuals over the years have been held captive by foreign governments. They've said that they were CIA assets or government assets. And yet they've come out and said, no, I'm just with Peace Corps. Or no, I'm just a journalist. Well, I guarantee that there's a lot more to that story. And now we know that just a journalist is not just a journalist. And we also know the kind and caring, fuzzy people with Peace Corps have two faces. So again, this Mike Benz is going over how USAID paid journalists to dig up dirt and cook up crimes. They made it up. So again, we're talking about the difference between grants and contracts given to the public sector from private sector from the government. And you have to know that there's always strings attached. Somebody gives you something, you're on the hook to repay. So I wanted to look really quickly here as where, again, the whole focus of this conversation this week was getting real. Having you understand your own beliefs, your own integrity, your own values, understanding that your word matters. Your word matters to others, and your word has to matter to yourself. As we move forward, you're going to be requested to sign a contract to yourself. Not to me, I'm never going to see it. To yourself, giving yourself your word that you are changing the trajectory of your life. That this is a stance you're taking for yourself, for freedom. Not the door marked security where you know you're going to lose it all, but the door marked freedom where you can open up generational wealth for your entire family. This is a pathway of truth and light. But you can't be naive. There's no more time for that. You have to apply discernment. In fact, I was looking at some government documents yesterday, and they talked about discernment on their side. But the manipulation, again, of gaslighting so that you doubt your own discernment and you don't apply it in your life. Do not be discriminatory and judge a book by its cover is what we're told. We're done. No time for naivety. Use discernment. So who programs the programmers? Control in the age of AI. This came out in 2024. And it says, what do self-driving cars, social media recommendations, and medical diagnoses have in common? They're all governed in part by sophisticated algorithms. These seemingly impartial lines of code shape our world, influencing what news we see, the products we're offered, and potentially even our health outcomes. As artificial intelligence becomes even more pervasive, a fundamental question arises. Who holds the reins of power in this digital landscape? And who shapes the algorithms that shape our lives? What happened during lockdowns? Again, many of the CEOs, board members, and executives were removed. They were placed with people who would play ball. It takes a lot to tell people that they're lying, to gaslight them, to hide the truth, to shadow ban individuals who were right on target. Takes quite an individual. At some point, even if they believed that pathway, they had to realize the amount of gross abuse of the system. And yet the money was flowing at such a high level. Look at the amount of people who became extremely wealthy during COVID. We look no forward to those individuals out of third world country who have become multimillionaires, if not more, in Minnesota. We look at the massive amount of individuals who gained wealth for the homeless industrial complex in California. What about all those individuals? This is going back more. But Newsom now wants to look at the success of the bullet train in California. You need to look no further. It's all corrupt. There is no bullet train. There's nothing that's partially usable. It's a scam. So during the same period of time that you and I were told to sit at home, business was as usual behind the scenes for the intelligence agencies. They were lying on a scale unlike anything we've ever seen. The manipulation, the gaslighting. It's insane. And I ask again, were you fooled? Did you get the chemical injection in your body? Did you stay at home out of fear? Well, most people didn't if you didn't live in California, or specifically in Santa Clara County. At one point, I went outside and they had the chain link fence around the gas stations to make sure that people couldn't leave unless you already had that emergency tank of gas. And yet who ran freely during that time? Criminal activity, peaceful protests, cities burned down. You and I, if we flew, we needed validation of who we are. Individuals could just walk up and say they were from a foreign country, they didn't have ID, and they could fly anywhere in the United States, even with a US voucher. But what they also did was replace us in our jobs. Specifically, I'm talking about Silicon Valley tech companies. They removed individuals like you and I, individuals who knew that we had family to answer to, that we had somebody to bounce off the truth from, not individuals who essentially won the lottery by getting an opportunity to come into this country. They were not going to give that up. And if they were told to just do a little bit here, a little bit there, they wouldn't question it. So as we ask, who programs the programmers? The individual during that period of time weren't just foreigners overseas. that could be controlled by their own family. But they were foreigners on our own soil who were programming on campuses. Now, what was my proof of this? Well, there's a lot of evidence. But as I kept saying that I want to go into headquarters, it's just down the street from me here, and I kept being told no. Or I would be told yes, but I'd have to wait. Or yes, but this had to be hoops and hoops, which is essentially a no. So finally, I got approval to be on campus. And I got it an indirect way, which was very odd, but we won't go down that path. But I got approval. And I took my badge over. I just held it up right on my shirt. You know, I attached it right to my collar, and I held it up. And I had to use it actually to badge into the door. The doors are always locked. You had to get them unlocked. And so it clicked open. I walked into the receptionist, and I said, I'd like to talk to HR. And immediately I'm removed from campus. I'm walking around, and I see a lot of people, but nobody looks like me. Nobody's quite dressed like me. Nobody speaks like me or understands English. And I realized during those lockdowns, while we were locked off the campus, H-1B visa holders had to report to campus under the terms of the visa. So they were all in these buildings, working and programming and manipulating, probably mostly unbeknownst to them, but they were told what to do and they did it. And the result was changes to the taxes. Many people would pay money out of their, the small businesses would pay for QuickBooks payroll to take money out of the paychecks of the individuals, the employees, and set aside and then pay quarterly taxes on those. However, Intuit didn't send a lot of that money. And they would send it late and have penalties and constantly have the finger pointing at the individual saying, well, this must be you, when I can see on the background the games that were being played. Often, and I would say 99% of the calls that I did over here or tapped into were individuals because the day before their software worked, yet that day it didn't. They had programmers who had no clue what they were doing, messing around in the back end, as I could tell, switching things over to be driven by AI rather than humans, and didn't care about the outcome. They didn't know anything about accounting. They didn't know if you change one module, that it's going to affect a whole flow of other accounting principles. They didn't know any of that. They didn't care. They were told to do a job. They kept their head down. They did the job. What about YouTube banning over 100,000 content creators in one swoop? That's just a small amount of the YouTube content creators, but they all had a same common theme. What about Patreon? What about PayPal? PayPal even went so far as if they saw you on social media saying something they didn't agree with, they could block your PayPal funds. I think I may have said Patreon. Patreon was another one that blocked, but that's a different scenario. PayPal had an immense amount of control. And now we know that they also bought Honey for $4 billion to further manipulate you, allegedly. So where are we at today? Mike Benz has really opened up the possibilities for us through his investigation of USAID and the funding of independent, just kind, caring journalists who grab their knapsack and go out in the community and give stories that nobody else would hear about. But now we're aware that those stories that nobody else would hear about is because they're just stories. They're news stories. It's part of Mockingbird media. It's propaganda. And we have to stop buying into that. It's time to put your heads down, figure out how you're going to get on to the next level and move forward. Because as I've said, 2026, by April of 2026, we're going to be in a new world. You're absolutely going to be amazed at the possibilities. We've seen that gold has soared, silver, anybody who listened to those has, 250 times their money? That's not right. That number's not right. So silver, I think, is at 5x right now. And gold has gone up about 2 to 3x right now, I believe, just over the last few years. There's a lot of support there for you and I. We just got to listen to the right sources. All those years that we were being told by JP Morgan that Bitcoin was bad and horrible and we should not invest in that, and that nobody at JP Morgan was allowed to have that in their portfolio. Meanwhile, Jamie Dimon was over in Europe buying up as much Bitcoin as possible for his European businesses. You've got to look beyond what we're just being told and look for the truth and the facts. So here again, as we close out, I absolutely recommend looking at Mike Benz. He says it as it is. He's got a lot of great reporting on his channel. And this one on how USAID pays journalists to dig up dirt and cook up crimes ties together and has you ask the question, are you working for a sociopath? Here's to a great year as we're rounding the corner. Have a beautiful day today.